Hey everybody, welcome back to the Engineered Angler. Today I want to build a floating glide bait. It occurred to me that it's been a long time since I made one and I've never made a video of making a topwater glide bait. And since that last fishing trip where I was getting a lot of topwater action, I'm really stoked to actually make this and actually use it. Now let me define what I call a glide bait. A glide bait is typically a jointed lure, but it can be a solid body lure. And the fishing tactic behind this lure is a slow retrieve, a slow soft twitch, so the lure glides off to one side, you twitch it again, and it glides to the other side and just slowly moves. The idea is a lure that doesn't just stop. This lure is intended to glide and have the momentum and hydrodynamics to keep moving a little bit in the water between twitches. And the twitches are very soft, usually just a movement of your crank handle will get it to move and glide the way you want it to. Most of the ones I've made, including this one, are subsurface lures. They're usually suspending or slow sinking or maybe slow rising. But typically when you twitch them, they'll twitch under the water and just move slowly and you either sink a little bit or rise to the surface. All right, let's get started on the design. Before I explain the details of the design, if you're new to the channel, my name's Franco. I'm a professional engineer, a lure designer and lure builder, and an avid fisherman. And I make these videos so that I can share some of my ideas and techniques that I've picked up along the way and add a little bit of engineering and physics to the art of lure making. I think when I actually draw it out to scale, it'll be a little narrower and a little longer. But this is essentially the shape I want. A bulky head narrowing down to a more slender tail. It's going to be 4.5 inches long, which is 11.43 centimeters, and 1.25 inches deep from top to bottom, which is 3.18 centimeters. And the hinge point will be halfway down the body. I prefer a slightly different spacing for a swim bait, but this works really well for a glide bait. Now the joint will have a hinge loop and pin arrangement where there'll be a loop that fits in these slots and a pin that runs through them. So let's talk a little bit about the hydrodynamic sort of theory behind getting a glide bait to glide. It's a little similar to what we need to do for a walk the dog bait, which is to push the center of mass back and the center of drag forward. The reason for that is that when you pull the lure, you want the front of the lure to have enough drag to want to slow down, while the back of the lure has enough inertia to want to push through. And this brings the lure around and creates that typical glide. To do that, we'll use a little design trick. By having the mouth open, you have flat surfaces that create a lot of drag up front. The widest point of the lure is going to be at the joint. So I have plenty of mass back here to be able to add weight, because I want to be able to add weight without sinking the tail. And the key to having it nice and level is to weigh the two halves separate, so both of them are weighted and balanced as an individual piece. That usually works really well. All right, here's the design laid out with the proper proportions, and you can see it looks a little narrower and a little more streamlined, and we're ready to cut this out. I'm going to go ahead and pull this tape template off. Try to get it in one piece because we might just use it later to template out some foil. Alright, so the next step is to go ahead and mark where I'm going to actually have the joint. First thing I like to do is to draw a line from where the tie-on eye is going to be to the center of the tail, because I'm considering that the flow line. Check out that knot, it's almost a perfect eye. Now I need to draw a line vertically square to that line, right at the halfway point where I want to make the cut. And I'm just going to use this little T-square to do that. And then using the T-square, I can carry that line around the bottom. And then lining up with that line and my flow line, I can draw that line. Now I just need to complete it all the way around. And they should align pretty well on this last line. All right, that works. Now I need to draw a line right down the middle on the top of the lure. First I'll measure the lure's thickness. It's 20.55. I'll set the caliper to half that. And then I'm just gonna score a line in with the tip of the caliper. And to make it a little more visible to you guys, I'll just fill it in with the lead pencil. With the T-square set at 45, I can draw in the angle of my cut. I'll do the same thing on the bottom, and we'll take this thing and get it cut. I'm not going to worry too much that it's not perfect. All right, that'll do for now. When we're done shaping, I'll cut all the way through. And just using some draftsman's curves, I'll draw in what I think should be the contour from front to back. So it narrows up at the front, and then its widest point is right at the joint and gets even a little narrower at the back with a nice sweeping curve. I'm going to take this back to the bandsaw and cut off these big wedges, and then we'll get started on really shaping. Keep in mind you have to have some pretty good symmetry on this, else the lure will tend to twitch to only one side, or mostly to one side. So now it's in the final shape, I've got to taper down the top and the bottom a little less. So I'll leave a little more material down here as I taper this up. What that does for me is that as I pull through the water, it's going to want to tend to keep the lure down in the water and not come up to the surface too much. Because while it is going to be a topwater lure, I want it to be submerged as it stays on the top. So Alright, so that's got the shape nicely faired in. I've got it pretty much rounded off both top and bottom. I think you can see that it's a little wider on the bottom than it is at the very top. You can certainly feel it, that's for sure. Alright, so from here I'm going to go ahead and do a bunch of hand sanding, and then we'll do a little bit of carving. Okay, so I've gone ahead and got this thing nicely finish sanded. I drilled in the eye sockets so I could use that to align all my details that I plan to carve. Now there's not a whole lot of detail I'm carving, but that little bit of carving of the gill plates will pop a little bit when I put foil over everything. It'll look pretty cool. I thought, you know, a lure like this could use some fins. So I'm gonna go ahead and put a little dorsal fin and a little fin on the bottom here too. I typically don't use fins, especially on swim baits, because fins can be such a source of bad action. It can either stiffen up the action or throw the action off because they're not perfectly aligned. But on a lure like this, where you're just twitching and allow it to glide, there's not a whole lot to lose by putting fins in. And I'm gonna use my Dremel to go ahead and cut a slot in for the fins. I also need to cut a slot for the tail fin. Alright, that should do it. Now I can start carving. So I'm using very rudimentary techniques. I'll make a vertical cut right along the line I drew, keeping my thumb on it so that I have a limited amount of throw, so if it slips away from me, I won't cut out my own liver. And after you make your vertical cut, then you need to start cutting away material. And since I want my gill plate to be kind of standing out, I'm going to take away material down away from it. And after I'm done removing this material, I'll come back with some sandpaper and sand all this edge down so the cut marks aren't there anymore. Alright, I'm going to use a piece of popsicle stick to make the fins. I'll do the same top and bottom. All I've done is cut it to size, put a little bit of a curve here to match the curve of the body, just a little bit. And then I tapered the top edge a little bit, just so it looks a little more natural. I'll sight down it to make sure it's nice and straight, and then I'll glue it in with a little bit of CA glue. I wiped away the excess, and now I'm just going to spritz it with some accelerator. And that should take about 10 seconds to really set. And I'm going to do the same thing for the bottom. So I'll usually just sketch out my idea of what the fin should look like, and then I'll shape that in with the Dremel. Alright, so now that I've got the fins in, I'm going to go ahead and cut the lure in half. Alright, not too bad. All right, well, I've got it sanded down and pretty much ready to get a clear coat on there. I want to put a really thin coat of UV resin just to seal it, because the next step is to see how much weight we need to put in this thing. And for that, I need the wood sealed. But this is a good time to introduce the question of the week. Now, this week's question I'm going to answer with an experiment. If you guys remember, this bluegill swim bait is made with a continuous fabric hinge. And I had a lot of questions about whether that really could hold. Was that strong, and how strong was it? And the answer is, I think it's pretty strong, but I don't know how strong. So what I did was to prepare a sample using the same technique I used last time to glue the fabric inside this lure. And I'm going to take that little rig and put it on my electric winch with a little crane scale on it. And we're going to pull that thing apart and see how strong it actually is. And we have to wait for the epoxy in that sample to go ahead and set up completely before we do it. So we'll do that experiment a little later in the video. All right, so here's what it looks like after the clear coat. It's not perfect. It's going to need to be sanded again, but that's fine. This clear coat is just to seal it. I think that we can get away with just one hinge on this. Since it's not a swim bait, we don't need to have a really perfectly smooth action. We just need it to break and turn. So I'm going to simplify the design a little bit, and we'll just have one hinge. This will make it easier for me to put the weight in the back of the lure. Because what I intend to do is drill a hole right in this cut edge and put lead split shot. And hopefully I can fit all the weight I need. On the front one, I'm going to go in through the bottom like you typically do. But before we actually do that, we need to figure out how much weight to put in it. So I'm going to go ahead and weigh these things in water, and we'll have our answer. All right, I've got the scale zeroed and it's set to grams, and I'm just going to submerge the part of the lure just so it's not touching the bottom and it's not touching the sides and not too deep. I get exactly 20.0 grams for the tail. And now I'll do the head. So I get 18.4 grams for the head. And that shows that I shaped the lure just like I wanted to, with the tail having a little bit more mass. Now what I measured here is the direct measurement of the weight of the water that the lure displaces. So that's the volume of the lure. And if the lure weighs more than the weight of the water it displaces, it'll sink. If it weighs less than that weight, it'll float. So I want to get it close to that weight, but not so close that I run the risk of it sinking. So I'm going to be a little conservative and not get too close. Before I figure out how much weight I got to put in it, I have to weigh all the hardware with each section. So let's do the head first. Weighs 11.8 grams, and then I'm going to use this pre-made screw-in eye as my hinge eye. And here are the two twist eyes I just made, and then the hook I'm going to put on it. So we get 13.9 grams. We'll call that 14 grams. And we know we can't exceed 18 grams, but I really don't want to go any further than 16 grams. All I really need to add to the head then is 2 grams. Now let's do the tail. It weighs 12.3 all by itself, and this is going to be my hinge pin. It's just a little piece of stainless steel rod. And the tail hook eye and the hook. It's 14 grams as well. We can't exceed 20 grams, but again, I don't want to really go any farther. Let's say 19 grams on the tail. So we're going to have to find a way to get 4 to 5 grams up inside here. But before we go ahead and drill out for the weights, I want to go ahead and cut the slot for the hinge. And I'll do that with the Dremel tool as well. I got the general size of the slot cut out, and now to clean it up I put 3 discs on this little Dremel tool, and that'll help me clean up all the surfaces and go just a little deeper. And I've made this slot a little oversized because I want to be sure that after I put clear coat on this thing, the hinge won't get all sticky on me. Now it's time to drill the hole for the hinge pin. Alright, let's screw in the hinge eye. This is just a dry fit. I'll have to glue this in once I figure out how deep I need to go with it. I might turn it in another half turn. That gap's just a little bit big, but we're getting there. Alright, that's got the weight we need right there. 5.2 will do. Now we just need to find a way to get it inside the body. Hopefully that's going to be deep enough. Alright, let's get our weight again. So we're right at 18.2. Remember, we can't go over 20. This should keep us well under 20, even with paint and clear coat. Alright, now it's just a matter of filling and sanding, and we'll glue in all these hook eyes, and we'll get both of these things ready for painting. All right, I'm pretty happy with that. All the eyes are glued in with that Gorilla 2-part epoxy glue, and I think this is a perfect lure to have some foil on it. That'll give it some flash behind the paint, which I think will work really well in salt water. So let's go ahead and put foil on it. So when you're putting this on, the thing you want to do is always start off with the most critical alignment and just carefully work out the wrinkles, making sure that they don't all bunch in one spot. And I like using this little piece of stainless steel to work out the wrinkles I can't get with my fingers. I'm going to put some texture right here on the lower part of the gill with this little knurl wheel. Do that on both sides. Alright, I'm not sure how well the camera's going to pick it up, but I think the paint is going to enhance that look a little bit. Alright, it's time to find out how strong that fabric hinge is. Here's the tab rigged up. You can see the fabric right here. And here's our crane scale, and it's set to 0, and that's pounds right now. Alright, I've got a couple of cameras going. I want to make sure I capture the final braking load. And I've got a bungee here behind it, and it's connected above the load, so the scale won't be feeling what the bungee's doing. I just need that there so this block and tackle doesn't go flying around and knock me in the head. So this is a good time to put in your bets, right? How is this thing going to break? Do you think the glue will fail, or do you think the fabric will fail and rip? And what do you think the load's going to be? So I'll go ahead and go first. I think the glue's going to fail, and I think it's going to be somewhere between 80 to 120 pounds. That's a wild guess. All right, let's get ready to do it. All right, here goes nothing. Woo, it looked like about 115 or 112. So there you go. It ripped right there at the point where it comes out of the wood. I think that's plenty strong for the kind of fishing I do. If you're going after big saltwater fish, you'll have to upscale your hinge fabric. Alright, it's time to get painting on this thing, but before we move on, I just want to say thank you for all the folks who submit questions. And don't forget to keep submitting them, because we're going to keep answering those questions every week. I have the vent hood and the air conditioning on, so you'll have to put up with my voiceover. We'll get started with this silver pearlized paint from Createx. And I want to use it as a base coat for anything that doesn't have foil on it already. I love using transparent paints over foil and silver paint, especially this gold stuff. And I'll continue with transparent with this green, and I'll put that just above the gold, and I'll use this moss green for the top of the lure. And I'll use it for these speckle details too. And back to silver for these fin bones. And some pearl red for the inside of the mouth. Before I can actually assemble it, I need to put another clear coat on it. And before I do that, I've got to put the mid coat on it, the Minwax polyacrylic. And since you guys have seen me clear coat a million times, I'll spare you the repetition. I'll get it done. The next time you see it, we'll be assembling it and putting a tail on it and probably getting the hooks on it. All right, it's a brand new day and this thing is set for sure. Really happy with this paint job. I think it's going to work both in salt and freshwater. Although it looks kind of freshwatery, right? Alright, as usual I'm going to use this disposable brush to make the tail. And the first step is to free the bundle of fiber in there from the handle. Now because I don't want it this dense, I'm going to break this right about in half, or maybe take about a third off of it. And there's a little ball of glue here holding those fibers together. And I'll just grab the ball of glue and then give it a real good firm squeeze. And you see the fibers all spread out. And I'll put these fibers on the sticky side of this painter's tape. Make sure they're stuck on there good. And then flop over, making sure that I've got plenty of room for all the fibers in there. Now it's just a matter of drawing in the shape of the tail that I want and then cutting it out. Unfortunately, I didn't videotape when I drew it out and cut it out. But here it is, ready to be glued in. So what I like to do is put a little bit of the glue down in there. Then I'll drop the tail feather in there. Make sure it's more or less nice and straight. And hit the glue with some UV light. This will get it initially set. Now I can fill in the rest of the gap in there. And then the final touch is to put a little bit of a bead of glue right along the base of the tail. Alright, I'm pretty happy with the alignment of the tail, glued in nicely. I'll give it a little more time on the bigger UV light just to make sure it's set. Now we need to put the two halves of the body together, and all I gotta do is run this pin through the body and through the eye and push the pin deep enough so that just a little drop of UV resin holds it in there. Alright, that should do it. Alright, that looks really good. Let's pull the tape off the tail. Alright, let's put some hooks on this thing. Alright, let's put it in the tank, see what it looks like. There it is. A little bit head heavy, but that's okay with me. That means that it's going to dart underwater just a little bit and come back up to the surface. We're out here at the reservoir and I'm really happy with the finish on this lure, and I really love the shape of that tail fin. Unfortunately, the clouds are moving in. I'm hoping that we'll get a little break and we'll get some sunshine so I can show you what this thing looks like, not only from the surface but underwater a bit. Now that the sun is out, let me show you how it performs. The idea is to give it small twitches and let it glide. That's exactly the pace you want. Now it's going a little more under than I really wanted it to. It's actually behaving like a really standard glide bait. Was a little extra. Okay, I forgot to turn the camera back on, but look at the size of this guy. Oh my God, I got him worn out. Let me see if I can get him in the net. Oh, no. Oh, he came off. Oh, fudge. Oh man, what a heartbreak. I can't believe it. I hadn't turned on my camera and I was fiddling with it, and I had him tired out, but I knew he was barely hooked. I was trying to just keep him on long enough to get him in the net. God, it came off. That was 8 pounds if it was an ounce. Oh well, that's the end of the video. Sorry it was so long. If you're enjoying these kinds of videos, let me know. Give me a comment, give me a thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed, subscribe. Click that bell like everybody else says. This way you won't miss any of the videos. All right, I'm gonna keep fishing for another 10 minutes, 20 minutes. I'm pretty much out of time. See you guys next Friday.